Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
I'm so excited that our first guest has agreed to come on the programme, and I'll tell you why I'm excited. I received an email a few weeks ago from Mark Moore. I want to read you a very quick, a kind of a synopsised version of the email. He said, "Richie, my name is Mark. I'm a fan of what you do and, more importantly, the way you do it. Please, can you host a show discussing EMF weapons, voice to skull, targeted individuals, phenomena? I lost somebody incredibly close to me last year due, I believe, to this phenomena. And while I may never be able to prove what happened to him, I may be able to help others going through the same thing. There are some really good researchers in this field with great credentials that I can recommend if it's something that you would consider." Now, of course, it's something we would consider. We regularly, invite our listeners to tell us who they want to hear and why. And whenever it's possible to do that, we invite those people on. And our first guest tonight is an anesthesiologist. He's based in San Antonio, Texas. Now, he's the author of the acclaimed book, incredibly well-reviewed book, A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism in America. It's not his only book. We'll talk more about those during our conversation. He's treated numerous patients who have complained about voices in their heads, and some of them eventually being driven to serious psychosis. I'm delighted to welcome to the programme Dr. John Hall. Dr. Hall, it's lovely to chat with you. Thanks for taking the time out to speak to us.
Oh, thanks a lot, Richie. I'm glad to do it.
Well, listen, we will chat about a documentary that you've got coming up as well, that you're in the process of putting together, which is important. I think it's called Targeted. You mentioned that, so we'll get into that. But our listeners will be thinking, first of all, they'll be delighted that a medical man like yourself, because John, like it or not, and I'm not going to get off on the wrong foot with you, you're an establishment man, you're a system man, you're a man who'd be well considered and well liked in the community. You've got a very important job, a very serious job, and our listeners would love that a guy like you is talking about these issues. When did you first hear about, people hearing voices in their heads, and that might be not necessarily because they were undergoing some sort of psychosis, but because something external was happening? Tell us about that.
Well, just a quick synopsis for your listeners. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, the American government started a system of research called MKUltra. And what they were looking for was a way to remotely control human beings' minds in order to create Manchurian candidates, people that they could give an alternate personality to, send out to do a bombing or perform an act of espionage, revert them back to their real personality without the alternate personality realizing they've done it. So that way, under any amount of torture or questioning them on why they did it, they wouldn't answer because they wouldn't know they had actually performed the action. Well, long story short, come fast forward, the early research to do that was done using hypnosis, using drugs, using torture, and electroconvulsive therapy, and it worked. You could basically wipe the mind slate free, create a new personality, essentially an alias that a person wouldn't realize that they have, that can be induced by a trigger sound or trigger phone call. As technology progressed, they figured out that the brain is very susceptible to electromagnetic energy, and that you can entrain the EEG or the electroencephalogram, the EEG of the brain, to demonstrate rage, depression, anger, confusion, and even manipulate, heart rate, blood pressure, things like that, cause pain in the body by manipulating the brain. And it was done throughout the 60s. In the 70s, we actually had a Rockefeller Commission here in the United States where the government got caught doing it, mostly in Canada, using victims in Canada and the United States. And it all came to light. Well, the research didn't stop. There was some Freedom of Information material that came out about the early research in mind control. They buried it a little bit deeper, started doing it a little bit more covertly. And then you have what we have today, which is you no longer have to drug someone or take someone into a laboratory to do this. They found out that the brain is so susceptible to various frequencies of electromagnetic energy that the same thing can be done. You can control a person or entrain the person with a new EEG that will demonstrate a symptom strictly by bombarding the brain with that frequency of energy. And that was actually discovered when they found out that our Russian embassy in Russia was being bombarded by the woodpecker signal. And every time President Nixon would go to that embassy, he would have a nervous breakdown or break down into tears or get severe depression. Many of the other workers there were getting sick, and they figured out that the Russians were bombarding the embassy with a signal. Well, once they figured out that that could be done, our government took the research a few steps further, as well as your government and pretty much every industrialized nation, on figuring out how they can control individuals using electromagnetic energy. What your listeners may not realize, at least in the United States, there are no laws against experimenting on the public. So any types of these weapon systems that come forward, or drugs or radiation or anything that can be dispersed on the public, is completely legal for the government to experiment on the people with.
That's incredible, that you saying that, a man like you. And when did you start looking into it yourself? How did this information come to you, John?
Actually, in the first book, A New Breed, that book is a story or a chronicle of a girl that I had been engaged to. We were no longer engaged at the time she came to me, voicing some very strange complaints. She was being stalked by people she didn't know. These weren't former, boyfriends or coworkers. These were, the men in black, cars following her everywhere, people outside her house every day. And she was being attacked by directed energy and hearing the voices in her head of the people doing the attacking.
Now, John, can I just jump in? Did you initially think that she was having some sort of a psychotic episode?
Well, I mean, any physician is going to initially think that.
Yeah.
Ignorant of this technology. But what really distinguishes this is this woman at the time was in her 30s. She had no drug history, no alcohol history, and no history of mental illness. Had no life trauma in her life that would have pushed her over the edge. And most of these victims refer to themselves as target individuals, and they can pinpoint the day that they notice people stalking them. They can pinpoint the day that all of a sudden they started hearing voices. And these aren't voices of angels or God or telling them. This is someone who's like burning your chest with microwave energy. And at the same time, they're saying, I'm burning your chest with microwave energy. I'm going to give you cancer. I'm going to kill you. This is your last day on earth. You're being followed everywhere you go. And then they start to describe your whereabouts. That way, the target has no question that they're being watched or they're being followed.
John, are the subjects, are they lab rats? Are they being targeted? Because I'm thinking maybe your ex-girlfriend maybe wasn't targeted because she had any connections to anybody, in terms of political or anything like that. Maybe these people are basically lab rats, so they're doing these things to them, and at the same time, they're observing their reactions. Is that what you think this is?
Well, that's exactly it, Richie. You're right. She had no political affiliation. She was not a radical of any type.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think she even voted, honestly. And if you look at most of these targeted individuals, they're housewives, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're entertainers. It's all walks of life, every gender, every race. None of these people are radicals in any way that would have any political reason that they would be targeted. So the only explanation is indeed that they're being used as lab rats, because like I said, at least in our country and probably in yours, if you really look, there's no rules against black budgeted research on the public. And that's actually why my second book that's currently out is called Guinea Pigs, Technologies of Control. And it goes over experimentation that was done by our government non-consensually for decades, right up until today, where we're having experimentation with directed energy.
Folks, it's 27 minutes to the top of the hour. Dr. John Hall is on the line to us here. He's an anesthesiologist from San Antonio in Texas. He just described there how a former girlfriend of his began to hear voices, began to would basically tell him that she was being targeted by external forces. And he brilliantly described at the beginning of this conversation something we've touched upon in the programme before with Cassie O'Brien and with David occasionally and others, and that's the MKUltra mind control programme. John, loads and loads of tweets. You won't be surprised. By the way, folks, if you want to see what others are saying, it's Richie Allen Show, all one word. Put that into Twitter and press enter, and you'll see what other people are saying. A lot of people are asking about radio towers. Are they being used to MKUltra the public to be submissive? Now, That's what we're going to come to next. We're going to ask John about the technologies that they're using to do this. How do they actually do it, John? Let's break down the hardware. What sort of hardware are they using to do this?
Well, I mean, I do have connections within government. And when I wrote the first book and when I wrote Guinea Pigs, I contacted friends of mine that are still currently in the CIA. And believe it or not, there are people within government that are fighting this, or at least are against it. There's not much they can do short of, being accused of treason or releasing classified secrets. You see what happens when you release classified material, as Edward Snowden, from this country, they're moved to Russia. But the way it's done is called remote neural monitoring. And while most of it's being done via satellite, it can be done using Gwen towers. It can be done using cell phone towers. Anytime the government is going to invest billions of dollars in something, they're going to have a myriad of ways it can be done. It's not just one way. The way that most people are describing it seems to be satellite based. The people that I've worked with that are targeted individuals, they'll hear the voices and be attacked at home. They'll hear the voices and be attacked on a plane traveling cross country. They've left the United States to go to even Cuba. I had one targeted individual who thought, well, I'll go to Cuba. We have an embargo. There's not much going on at that time between the Cuba and the United States. I'll get away from it there. Still heard the voices, still was attacked by energy there. There's only a couple of ways you can globally attack someone. And the most common one is satellite-based directed energy weapons. The way the system works is it's based on your brain waves, your EEG. Everybody has a different EEG or brain fingerprint, and they stalk you long enough to get all of your biometric parameters, your body identification, facial identification, brainwave identification. Some are even saying now that they're using DNA resonance, that when you bombard anyone's body with the right frequency of radio frequency, that your DNA will resonate. Well, and everyone's DNA is specific to them. So the signal you get back, obviously, is going to be unique to you. The way they do it with the brain is when you shoot two dissimilar frequencies into the brain, one hemisphere entrains one frequency, the other hemisphere the other frequency. They compete and spit out an interference wave. That interference wave you can actually get the EEG out of and track you based on your EEG. The unique thing with that technology is you can also heterodyne the brainwave, the EEG that you get, re-entrain it into the victim, and then imagine having a catalog of EEG waveforms that correspond to anger, depression, rage, fast heart rate, hands twitching, feet burning, or whatever symptom they want you to have. They re-entrain that brainwave, your brain entrains it, and then you display the symptom.
I tell you what, shall we get to a few comments on Twitter? There's, I reckon we've had 50 tweets on this already. Alex asks a question that we have touched on, Alex. Why would they test on people? What purpose does it serve? Any ideas? We've touched on that. Catherine asks, could the signals from Wi-Fi have any effect on people? That's a brilliant question. We'll come back to that in a second. Tristan on Twitter asks, Richie, can you ask about false flags in regards to this? Now, Tristan is asking, of course, about events, terror attacks that we are told were committed by person A, but they might have been committed by person B to make it look like person A. Do you think, John, in all your research into this and all the work you've done, is that somebody can be manipulated to do something as heinous as take the life of somebody else without being, in other words, kind of surgically bypassing their moral fibre, their moral decency? Is that possible?
Oh, most definitely. That's the reason it was created.
To basically get decent people to do terrible things.
Exactly. It was initially the whole research was initially started to create Manchurian candidates. That would be me taking you, giving you an alternate personality as a killer, sending you out to kill by triggering your alternate personality, let's say with a phone call or a ringing bell or a keyword. And once I give you that keyword, you go out and kill who I've sent you to kill. When you're done, I revert you back to your Richie Allen personality. And when the police pick you up and start grilling you, what are you going to say? I have no idea what you're talking about. I would never do something like that.
My mind is currently, I'm thinking of I'm terrible, me, John, when it comes to remembering names. But the Cincinnati murderer in the cinema, I can't remember his name. It's James. It might be James something or other. When
Colorado.
yeah, that's the one. Thanks for that. When he was arraigned, he looked like he hadn't a clue, didn't he? He looked like he was born yesterday.
Well, and when they arrested him in the parking lot, he was calmly resting his hands on the trunk of his car. And even the police said that he seemed like he was possibly on something and didn't realize that he had performed the crime. We saw the same thing with Aaron Alexis that shot up the Navy Yard here until police killed him. Aaron Alexis had emailed several human rights groups here complaining that he was being attacked with extremely low frequency waves and that someone was trying to control his mind. He wasn't controlled into doing the shooting. He did find that they were doing some of the research on this at the Navy Yard, and that was strictly a vengeance shooting, which is why he carved "This is my ELF weapon" on the side of his gun.
Wow. We're joined this hour, folks, by Dr. John Hall. He's a brave man. He's an anesthesiologist from San Antonio. He's authored 2 books, A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism in America, and Guinea Pigs, Technologies of Control, which is still very, very new. Those books are available at all good online retailers, and they're very fairly priced as well. This is serious stuff here. We're talking about the government or other dark, sinister forces maybe above the government and their ability to speak directly to your mind, to tap into your subconscious using technology that is not publicly known about. Let's be honest about it. And as John said, there are no laws anywhere that prevents them from experimenting on people like this. Cassie asked a great question about Wi-Fi, John. We're all being pushed to Wi-Fi these days. We can't move without seeing a Wi-Fi tower with these horrible big, they look like speakers, these horrible boxes on them. This is obviously no good either. Now, I don't believe it is. I believe it interrupts your sleep patterns. It messes up your health. It interferes with your thought processes. What's the relationship between Wi-Fi and these old MKUltra mind control programs? Can they access us through our Wi-Fi devices?
They can access you through Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi has a host of other problems with it too that I don't know if in the UK, if you guys have the same problem we have, but there's been an exponential rise in people turning up with type 2 diabetes, diabetes of later onset. Typically in the old days was usually caused by obesity. Well, now we have more and more young, thin people coming in with type 2 diabetes. There's quite a bit of research coming out now that exposure to chronic EMF and electromagnetic waves through Wi-Fi or radio towers or electric towers or electric grids that are exposure to so much EMF actually lowers your vitamin D3 levels so low, which is required for sugar metabolism, that you end up having high glucose levels. And indeed, if you look at the onset of Wi-Fi and at the onset of having, pretty much power lines everywhere now, there's not many places you can get away from power lines anymore, that you begin to see the exponential rise in type 2 diabetes, which is to the point now of, at least in the States, becoming a national emergency. And they've written it off to our diet, that so many people are eating fast food. But more and more people are also working out and eating healthy, yet we're seeing this exponential rise. So not only is the Wi-Fi bad as far as targeting, being able to bring in your brainwaves or your EEG or other biometric parameters for surveillance, but it's also ruining our health.
Tell you what, the questions are flying in here. Dr. John Hall on the line, live from Texas. John, before I put another tweet to you, just a very quick one. I mean, I'm not one for, blowing smoke up up the butts of my guests, but it does take a bit of courage when you're, an established man like that, somebody in the community that's respected in your community, in your neighbourhood because of your job. It takes a bit of courage to start talking about these things because undoubtedly some of your colleagues probably think John's lost his marbles there, How does that work for you?
Well, initially, I'll be honest with you. Initially, when the first book came out, indeed, that's what a lot of people thought. And I didn't realize how bad of a problem that this had became. I was basically trying to expose what happened to this woman I wrote about. She basically was mind controlled into drinking wherever they put Rohypnol, which is a date rape drug, and was being used as a sex slave by the people who were surveilling her. until we could get her name changed and get her moved out of San Antonio, away from the people that were doing it. This isn't hypothesis. We actually caught the people doing it in San Antonio, Texas. The group that was actually targeting her was a private investigative group owned and operated by a former FBI agent whose son was a high-ranking DOD official. They had the clearances and they had the access to the technology. Even knowing that, we couldn't get them arrested. They were protected by the government.
Wow.
So that's what we're dealing with, and that's why I wrote the book. My evidence was firm in everything that I mentioned in both books. Even so, because this is so relatively unknown and has been hush-hush, certainly some of my colleagues and even my attorney came to me after the first book and he said, "Oh my God, you're going to lose your license. This is crazy."
I'd have worried about that, John. If I was your friend or your brother or your son or your nephew, I'd be saying, "Jesus, John, be careful," because they will try and humiliate you.
Public with the book and radio shows like yours probably has saved my life. I wasn't so worried about licensure losing my practice. Most of my patients know that I write. They bring my books.
We've just lost John momentarily there. I'll try and get him back, and we'll see. Is he online? He just disappeared very quickly there. Let's see, can we get him back on the line? It's 14 minutes to the top of the hour. That was very sudden, wasn't it? You're with the Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com. I think John is back on the line now. I don't know what happened there, John. Sorry about that. And he's still...
No, so into my story, certainly most of my colleagues believe it now. They've seen so many victims and heard so many victim stories, they know it. The one interesting fact is my lawyer, who told me not to publish the book because I would look crazy, 10 years later, he called me and he said, "Hey, remember that book, A New Breed, you wrote?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "It's happening to my wife. How do I stop it?"
Wow. A couple of really quick questions. We've got about 15 minutes left. The people targeting your ex-girlfriend, brilliantly, you confronted them. Did they have anything to say, John? Did they fess up to it, or did they just do a runner? What was the story there?
No, they actually took the bolts out of the hood latch to my truck, so my hood flew up on me going down the highway, and then they riddled my bedroom with bullets while I was sleeping.
Jesus Christ, I didn't know that. Wow.
No, these people are protected. You have to have a clearance to have access to this technology. This is not technology, contrary to what some of the people may read on the internet. This is not your neighbor with a microwave oven and with a funnel in the door, or any type of handheld or man-made weapon that's being used. You have to have, this is a weapon system used by the government for espionage and surveillance. It was first used to put voices in the heads of Iraqi soldiers in the first Iraqi freedom. At that time, it was called Silent Sound Spread Spectrum, or SQUAD. And we had, I think, 2,500 Iraqi soldiers got dropped to their knees and disassembled their weapons because they heard Allah tell them to do it in their head.
Yeah. Oh, look, we could be here all night with this, John. We'll get you back on again real soon, by the way. We're not going anywhere just yet, but there's just so many questions. John Hall is on the show. Guinea pigs, by the way, folks. Guinea pigs, Technologies of Control is available, as is John's first book. Go to any online retailer. John, I'm thinking of Mark Moore, the listener to this programme, who emailed us and asked us, Claire and myself, asked us to get you on. My heart breaks for him. Mark he's a professional man. He has a job, he has a family, he's doing well for himself. He's not a conspiracy theorist, and he's convinced that his brother on, I think the 31st of March, I think last year, I've not got the actual email to hand, I think it was around about then, was, basically died because of what they were doing to him, and he's convinced of it. I wonder how many people, are being diagnosed with schizophrenia, John, are being told you've got some sort of, post-traumatic, manifestation of some sort of psychosis, when really they're being targeted by this sort of technology. Now, I'm going to quickly run through a few comments. The most common question coming in at the moment is there anything, and of course this is where we could make a very bad joke and talk about tinfoil hats, of course, but is there anything people can do if they suspect they're being targeted? Is there anything, John? Is there any hope for people?
The first thing, the advice I give to my targets is, as soon as you notice yourself being stalked, that's your best opportunity to do something about it. The police will deal with stalking complaints. I know people are scared to report it because they think, well, I'm not certain if I'm being stalked. If you think you're being stalked and you see the same people following you everywhere you go, call the police on them. Stop it there. If you can stop it there, you'll never get the rest of it. Once you're actually being targeted or hearing voices or being attacked by directed energy, it's based on the brainwave, and I give specific instructions on how to deal with that in the book. You can free yourself from it. Many people have and are continuing to do so. You have to alter the EEG. You have to stop responding to the voices so they can't continue to entrain you. It's done by entrainment, by neuro entrainment.
I've got to say hi to Natalie. Where does strong will or spiritual strength come into this? Is there any defence? We just talked about defence. I don't know if people would be strong enough to, mentally push it away. Maybe they would. Martin Houston, a friend of ours at the programme, great activist, great human rights activist. Martin says this might explain Jeremy Corbyn. This is very interesting, John. This is very interesting. Jeremy Corbyn swept to the leadership of the British Labour Party last year. He's a humanitarian, human rights activist, very much anti-globalisation, very much anti-war. He's become almost like a paper tiger since he took centre stage, John. And some of our listeners wondering, particularly Martin, is there any way that, without knowing it, he's being targeted? He might be, I suppose. You can't really answer that other than say it's possible, maybe.
Well, people that are targeted know they're being targeted, and there's a difference between being targeted and controlled, and they can do both. People that are being controlled make decisions without knowing that those decisions are being manipulated. People that are being targeted are the ones that are hearing voices being attacked, and they do realize that they're under surveillance and that they are being targeted. But you have the other end of the spectrum where political leaders certainly can just be controlled and manipulated and never know they are.
9 minutes to the top of the hour, folks. I'm going to say it again. Guinea Pigs, Technologies of Control by Dr. John Hall. Check it out. John, tell us about this documentary you want to make. Sounds brilliant. It's going to be called Targeted.
We've started actually filming a documentary where we have former NSA whistleblowers who are admitting not only being targeted by the technology, but the technology exists. Several PhDs who worked on the technology for the CIA, myself who has dealt with a lot of victims, and many, many testimonies from victims themselves that we're compiling as a documentary. The documentary is being used as a prequel to a drama based on a true story feature film that's actually being done on my first book, A New Breed. That's newbreedmovie.com is the website for that. We are looking for investors in the feature film and for people who wish to be included in the documentary.
Give us that again, that website, John.
Newbreedmovie.com.
Newbreedmovie.com. James Kershaw says, false flags, plenty of them. It's all connected. He says, Wi-Fi is bombarding us. Casbold was a Manchurian candidate, but he knew, he says. And there was also a question on that. Let me just scroll down there, by the way. So many tweets coming in. I think it might have been asked by Betsy in New Zealand. Think about these tweets, John. We get so many of them; they just disappear off the page. You end up scrolling back down. While we're doing that, you will, of course, obviously have looked into whether or not we have the mental strength to push back against it. Do we?
Yeah, actually, you do, and and that is how I teach most targeted individuals to escape it. It's real tempting to lay there and communicate back and forth with the voices. It's essentially synthetic telepathy. So not only are they putting voices in your head, they're hearing your answers back by thought. So as long as they keep that entrainment, then you're actually able to be found on the grid and attacked with the weapon system. If you can block, learn to ignore the voices and not respond back, which takes a lot of self-control and a lot of self-mind control. If you can block that, then that you're not able to be tracked on the grid, and then the targeting with the weapons actually stops or lessens. So a lot of it being strong-willed is, and certainly, any type of spiritual belief certainly helps. I'm a Christian, and I have no problems talking to most of my Christian friends about that. They see it more as a spiritual thing than necessarily a technological thing, or basically, demonic forces using bad men with technology to to attack people. But my spiritual friends, see this as a fight between good and evil, and certainly seem to believe it more than my non-spiritual friends.
John, we're seeing a lot of occult symbology being used by young pop stars. I'm thinking of Miley Cyrus. I'm thinking of, maybe she's not so young, Katy. She was married to Russell Brand, Katy Perry and others. And there's a lot of satanic symbology in their videos and in their live performances. And I was having a chat about this with David Icke the other day. I was telling David you were coming on, and he was delighted. David is very interested in the subject as well. And he said you can almost tell, now a guy like you must be able to tell when looking at some of these pop singers, these younger ones, that they are under the influence of this technology. Do you think so?
Yeah, and actually I've spoken with a number, I can't mention names, but with a number of movie stars from Hollywood. And Hollywood is that it's used for control quite a bit in Hollywood. There's no mistaking it. I mean, there was one particular actor, his name's escaping, but he came forward. Stephen Sheldon is another actor that's come forward that this technology, and in California, is probably the worst state in the United States as far as victims complaining of this as well.
Wow, and I suppose that's of no surprise to you. California, obviously, it's Hollywood is one of the great centres of mind control in terms of shaping people's opinions around the world through the media, through films and stuff like that. Buzz was on to ask, we've only got a couple of minutes left on this, definitely be asking you back again, John, if you want to come back, because this is very, very serious stuff. Buzz was on to ask, Richie, you must ask John about Dr. Rowney Kilda. She researched this, she, and she knew she would be murdered by them, and she actually was. What do you make of her case, if you know about it?
No, I do know about it, and I knew her. She was martyred for this. She was one of our top researchers on the effects of ELF and electromagnetic fields on the human body. Her early research on sugar metabolism is what kind of set the basis for us realizing that constant bombardment with ELF does give you type 2 diabetes. And she knew she would be martyred, in her fight, and she has been, as well as Fred Bell. Fred Bell is another PhD and physicist who came out against this. He was given a heart attack in a hotel room not long after doing Jesse Ventura's show. So they eventually will get around to killing all of us.
Well, I mean sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank God there are guys like you that have the courage to write about it and to research it and to talk about it. I really mean that. Folks, John's latest book is Guinea Pigs, Technologies of Control. Go to any online retailer there and find out how to get the book. And of course, we mentioned at the beginning of the programme, his first book was A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism in America. John, do you want to quickly give us that website again for the film where people, I think it was newbreed.com, was it?
Newbreedmovie.com.
Newbreedmovie.com. John, please come back again soon and talk to us. There were about 500 questions, and I'm not just making that up, that we've not been able to get through. Come back in a few weeks' time and let's do a longer segment when you've got time, and we'll take Q&A from the audience, if that's okay.
Oh, I will. There's a large number of victims in the UK, and they need to get together and organize. Pleasure
to have you on the programme. Dr. John Hall, look after yourself.
Thank you, Richie.
Bye for now. What a great guy. Dr. John Hall on the line to us from San Antonio in Texas.